I appreciate you stopping by once again for another episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the Radio Craftsmen Model C550 Monoblock amplifier. In episode 74, I reviewed the Craftsmen Model 500 Monoblock amplifier, and that amplifier was rated at 15 watts into 8 ohms. The Model C550 is rated at 30 watts into 8 ohms, and really that was the only specification I could find on the Model C550. There was nothing as far as THD or SNR or anything like that. I couldn't find anything other than what its output power was. Now, in 1954, this sold for around $125, which would be about $1,400 in August of 2023. Now, actually, I have two of them, so they will be tested as a stereo amplifier. And as you will see in the tour, they are basically pretty much all original, other than the tubes have been replaced, and on one of the amplifiers 2 capacitors have been replaced. But other than that, as best I can tell, they are all original, and you'll see what they look like as far as the build and all that in just a little bit. Here we have a rear view, I'll call it, of the Craftsman C550 amplifier. Starting over here, we have connections for a 16 ohm speaker, an 8 ohm speaker, and here's our ground connection. Here's just a little placard with the serial number, the model number, and it shows the tube and transformer layouts. It basically has a pair of KT66s, or originally there were KT66s, now they're 6L6s, and then it has a 5U4 rectifier tube, which would be that guy, and a pair of 6 SN7 tubes. Underneath this cover is where the bias adjustments are made. There's 2 potentiometers there. Here's our power on-off switch and a fuse. Here's another view of the C550. The only thing that is a little bit unusual are the venting holes there. The other side does not have venting holes, and you can see our power transformer here and some of the tubes right here. Here is yet another view of the amplifier, and this particular one has a bit more pocking on the chrome finish than the other one did. I also was incorrect in the tube. I don't know if it'll show up right here, but that tube is actually a 5NO30 tube, and this is our 5U4G tube, and of course these are the 2 KT66s, or today they're 6L6s, and here are our 2 6N7 tubes. So our last little point of interest is the RCA input connection, which is this guy right here, and it's not the longest RCA connector, so it kind of just barely fits in, or at least the cables I use just barely fit in there, but they fit in there well enough for it to work just fine. So this is what the underneath of the right channel amp looks like, and if you look over here and over here, those are the original capacitors, and they're called wax capacitors. I'm guessing that those probably should be replaced, as well as the electrolytic. It looks like there's an electrolytic up here, and it's hard to tell whether the filter caps have been replaced or not. My guess is they have not been replaced, but I'm not 100% sure on that. You can also see the nice build quality of the unit. They tie wrapped all their wires down. You can see the little tie wraps there, and it's very clean. There's not a ton going on there. It looks like everything else is original compared to the other one, and I'm going to flip over to the other one there. Here are the bias pots right here. Unfortunately, I could not find a procedure used to set the bias pot, but this does look pretty much original. You have these bumblebee caps right here, and I'm going to go flip over to the other channel. So this is the left channel, and you can see that the 2 capacitors here, the bumblebee caps, have been replaced with more modern caps, but other than that, they look very similar. These look different than the other side, these resistors here, and they still have the original capacitor here, but everything else seems to be fairly close to the other amplifier. Here we have the Craftsman C550 putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. And you can see that the gains for both channels are about 22 dB, a little over that. The THD plus noise anywhere from minus 64 to minus 57 dB. It looks like the right channel is obviously not running as clean at 0.13% THD versus 0.06% THD. However, the SNR on the right channel is about 9 dB better than the left channel, so that's kind of interesting. Here we have the frequency response of the C550, and it's putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. There is some stuff going on here, some ringing at the low end of the frequency band for the right channel. Also, if you remember, the right channel had a greater THD than the left channel. The left channel, on the other hand, looks pretty darn flat all the way up to 20 kilohertz. It's only down 0.4 of a dB. And once we get about, maybe 200 hertz or so, the right channel starts straightening out. But I'm not really sure what is going wrong with this. Most likely a capacitor is off somewhere. I decided to drop the input signal level to the C550 such that now I'm only getting about a little over a watt into 8 ohms, and you can see how much the THD has improved, particularly for the left channel, where they're both less than 0.09%. The right channel has a better SNR, about 75 dB, versus the left channel 66 dB, and the THD plus noises have improved. The right channel about minus 62 dB, and the left channel about minus 65 dB. Here we have the frequency response of the C550. In this case, it's putting out just a little bit more than 1 watt into 8 ohms. And you can see that that ripple effect, or that ringing effect that we had for the right channel with it putting out 5 watts is very small now. It's less than plus or minus 0.2 of a dB, I guess. And we're still down about 0.4 of a dB at 20 kilohertz, but it really improved the right channel by lowering input signal level. Also, the THD, as you saw, improved as well for the right channel at the lower power level. Here we have the C550's multi-tone response, and it's showing about 10 bits of distortion-free range. Here we have a plot showing the C550's output impedance, and if you look at the lowest value for output impedance, which would give us the greatest damping factor, you can see that that would be somewhere around, we'll say 0.75 ohms, and if you divide 8 by that, you come up with a damping factor of around 10. There was no specification that I could find on it, but that just gives you an idea what it measures today. This plot shows the THD versus frequency for a couple different power levels, and that's into 8 ohms. And once we get to about 50 hertz, which is in this range right here, our THD is less than 1%, regardless of the power level. And once we get into the 100 hertz until we get to maybe 10 kilohertz, the THD is less than about, looks like 0.8% or so, and then we are a little bit over 1% here at the high end of the band at the 20 watt power level, at least for the right channel. This plot shows the noise level of each of the C550 amplifiers. In this case, both inputs are terminated into shorts, and you're just looking at the noise of each of the amplifiers. Let me go ahead and turn off the left amp. You can see the right amp is not as noisy. Both of them do have the normal 60 hertz, 120 hertz, 180 hertz, and 240 hertz power supply hum spikes in them. And overall, that's at minus 60 dBV down. So it's not the worst I've ever seen by no means. And probably there's going to be some hum coming out of this when you're close to the speakers. Right now, we're putting out about 27 watts into 8 ohms at 1 kilohertz. And while there was no specification for the C550s as far as distortion or SNRs, it did say that it was capable of putting out 30 watts into 8 ohms. So I'm going to slowly crank it up, but you can see we're bordering on 1% THD. Right now the SNRs are not too bad, but I'm going to go ahead and crank up the power just a little bit, and we'll see what happens. So you can start seeing it's getting a little bit uglier, and we're at almost 2% THD now. The SNRs aren't really bad, but the THD plus noise are in the minus 35 dB area. As far as harmonics, let me pull those up. What is interesting is that our even harmonics right here, this would be the second harmonic, they are less than the third harmonic or the odd harmonic, which is not usually the case with tube amplifiers. As I mentioned earlier, I was not able to find any specifications on the model C550 other than it was supposed to put out 30 watts into 8 ohms. And it did do that, although the distortion was high by at least my standards. I think it was about 2%. Now, when I backed that down to, was it 27, 28 watts into 8 ohms, the THD was less than 1%. So for an amplifier that is 70 years old and pretty much all original except for maybe 2 capacitors on 1 amp and the tubes have been replaced at some point, it did a pretty good job. I mean, there was some ripple on the right channel in the low part of the frequency response. Once you got past that, it was really not too bad out to 20 kilohertz. Now, as far as the sound of this, I decided to hook it up to my speaker of choice for tube amplifiers, which would be the Klipsch La Scalas, and I drove the C550 monoblocks with my Carver C1, and it sounded really good. I do let it warm up for at least 30 to 40 minutes before I start listening, and I thought it had a really good sound. When I cranked it up, I didn't notice any distortions. It did fine. I couldn't complain about anything about it. And that low frequency thing on the right channel, you really aren't gonna hear that being how low it was. And I didn't notice anything on my tracks that have a lot of bass in them that I use for testing. But it sounded good. So as far as the hum and all that, the one amplifier, surprisingly, the left channel amplifier with the 2 caps that were replaced, that amplifier had a bit louder hum than did the right channel. The right channel was pretty normal, a little bit of hum, little hiss. The left channel was louder that if you walked away several feet, you still heard it. It wasn't like real bad, but it was there. However, once you start listening to music, you don't hear the hum at all. So that was just the only thing that I noticed about it. I didn't notice any weird turn-on sound. Some amplifiers, some tube amplifiers will start growling and making sounds as they warm up, which would be normal. Apparently, the model C550 has a turn-on circuit that stops applying some plus B voltages for, I think it's 60 seconds from what I read. So by doing that, I didn't hear any weird sounds as this thing warmed up at all, and when I turned it off, I didn't really hear anything unusual either. So I think it's a very nice amplifier. I don't think it sounds as good as my Macintosh McKit 30s or MC30s. I would have to do an A/B test to prove that, but that could be a user bias. So as far as the overall sound, I would say that it really was good, and if you hook it up to some efficient speakers, it's probably going to do a good job for you. And they are somewhat collectible. I saw a pair sold for $3,000. You don't see very many of these coming up for market, so they're a bit rare. But once again, if you came across some of these, they would be a nice tube amplifier to have in your collection. They do look nice with the chrome finish and all that. Once again, I thank you for taking time out of your schedule to check out this video. And if you have some comments that you want to share, those are always fun, or at least they have been so far. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, that would help it grow. And if you like the video, click the like button, as you probably know from other YouTubers. Once again, until next time, have a great day or night.